Late February, Albuquerque, New Mexico. It's still dark out. A 68-year-old man gets up, he gets dressed, he walks out of the house, he leaves his phone sitting on the counter, his prescription glasses right next to it, and that little watch on the nightstand, the one that counts every beat of his heart. He leaves that too. Then he walks off into the dark, and nobody's seen him since. Now, this was the man who used to run the Air Force Research Laboratory, the man who oversaw some of the most classified aerospace work that this country has ever done, the man whose old command sat at Wright-Patterson. That's the base that, depending on who you ask, still holds whatever the military hauled out of the desert outside of Roswell, New Mexico. The people online had a name for him. They called him the UFO General. His name is McCasland, William Neil McCasland. Now, there's a detail I can't get past. When he walked out that door, he didn't leave everything behind. He took just one thing with him, a .38 caliber revolver. The phone, the glasses, the heartbeat monitor, he left that all on the table, but he kept the gun. Now hold that thought, because when McCasland vanished, his name was already written down on a list the United States Congress had been putting together of people that they wanted to bring in and question about UFOs. Now, needless to say, he never made the interview. And honestly, that alone would be a strange enough story to fill an episode. But there's so much more going on here than meets the eye, because William McCasland isn't the only one. Depending on who's doing the counting, there's 8 of them, maybe 11, some say 13, a few say more than 20. We're looking at a bunch of scientists, lab workers, engineers, people wired into this space, into nuclear, into the kind of work that this country doesn't discuss in the open. They're now dead or simply gone. Now, please understand, this isn't a rumor anymore. The FBI has opened a review. A committee in Congress started sending letters to the Pentagon, and the President of the United States stood in front of the cameras and said he hoped it was random. Here's what every official voice in the story will tell you, and it's true. Not one of these cases has been formally tied to another. Not one, no proven link, none whatsoever. Full stop. Maybe that's the whole story. Maybe it really is just bad luck. But the people, the timing, the work they all did, something about it don't sit right. And I gotta warn you, once you see the pattern, it's really hard to dismiss. I'm John Genoa, and you're watching America's Strangest History, coming at you from the great state of Vermont. What's going on with all these missing and dead UFO scientists lately? Stay with me. So about this man, William Neil McCasland, he was an astronautical engineer, degrees from the Air Force Academy, from MIT, and from the Kennedy School up in Harvard. And he didn't just work at the Air Force Research Laboratory, he ran the place. The 7th man to command it. Now, I told you his last post was over at Wright-Pat, and yeah, people love to bring up the Roswell stuff out there, and much of it is speculation, but here's the part that isn't. Wright-Patterson is where the Air Force ran Project Blue Book, the real one, the official government investigation into unidentified flying objects. If the United States military looked into a UFO, for years, the paperwork ran through Wright-Pat. So when people started calling McCasland the UFO General, the nickname had some backing. Now back to that morning. When McCasland walked off, the response was pretty big. First came a silver alert. Then the FBI stepped in to help run the search. And they searched for months. Helicopters, ground teams, dogs. Want to guess what turned up? Just one thing, a gray Air Force sweatshirt, and was found a little over a mile east of his house. And after that, nothing. So think about what we're looking at. A man sitting dead center in this country's most classified aerospace work. He's gone days before Congress wanted to ask him about UFOs, and the most capable search operation on planet Earth comes back with a sweatshirt. I mean, if you're the kind of person who already thinks something sinister's going on, this is your case right here. But I promised you both sides, so let's do that. Because the loudest voice pushing back on all this came from inside the house. McCasland's wife, Susan McCasland Wilkerson, she got on Facebook and she shut the abduction theory down hard. Said her husband had only very commonly held clearances, nothing exotic. She said he'd been dealing with a chronic health issue. And then she said, and I'm quoting her now, this connection is not a reason for someone to abduct Neil. And she wasn't the only one saying pump the brakes on the conspiracy theories. Lieutenant Kyle Woods of the Bernalillo County Sheriff's Office, he told reporters McCasland had been dealing with something that he called mental fog, that McCasland actually backed out of a few research groups because of it. And then there's the dinner. The night before he disappeared, McCasland sat down to eat with some people, a few of them from the Space Force. And later on police body cam, one of the women at that table described him. She said he was spacey, quiet, just not himself that evening. And the sheriff's office, for the record, says there's no evidence of foul play. Got that? So there it is. The other story. A 68-year-old man, not well, mind getting foggy, has an off night, and the next morning, he wanders off and doesn't come home. And honestly, that happens. more often than you might want to know. This right here is the skeptic's whole case wrapped up in one man, right? Not so much. Because except all of it, except the fog, except the health, the bad night, it still doesn't quite close the case, does it? A man whose mind is supposedly slipping, he forgets his phone, his glasses, his heart monitor, but he remembers his revolver. The most advanced search in the country turns up a sweatshirt and quits. And every bit of it lands the same week his name is sitting on a list to talk to Congress about the exact thing he spent his whole life around. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what happened to William McCasland. Nobody can. Not yet. What I can tell you is this. He's case number one, and the further we go, the harder it gets to call number one a coincidence. So forget the numbers. I'm done with them. Let me tell you about some of the people, one at a time, and watch for yourself whether a pattern starts to show up. We start in New Mexico, Los Alamos. You know the name. It's where they built the bomb. It's still one of the most secured pieces of ground in the entire country. Anthony Chavez worked there for years, retired back in 2017. By 2025, he's an older man, late 70s, and one day in May, Anthony Chavez walks off on foot and is never seen again. His car turns up locked, his phone, his wallet, his keys, all of it left behind. He took nothing with him but the clothes on his back, and he walked out into the open country. Los Alamos police searched hard, and for the record, they turned up no sign of foul play. Now compare that to the second one. Same lab, Melissa Cusius. She worked at Los Alamos too, an administrative assistant, but one who held security clearances. June 2025, just weeks after Chavez, Melissa goes missing near a little spot called Talpa, New Mexico. And curiously, her phone had been wiped, factory reset. It's cleaned right back to the day it came out of the box. You don't factory reset a phone by accident. That's a deliberate act. Maybe she did it herself. Maybe she didn't, but somebody wiped that phone clean on purpose. And for almost a year, nobody knew what became of her. And then just a couple weeks later, a hiker up in Carson National Forest found human remains. It was Melissa Cusius. There was a handgun with her. And as of right now, the medical investigation hadn't determined how she died. The cause, the manner, it's still open. So let me be careful here. We don't know what actually happened to that woman. It could be the simplest, most ordinary kind of tragedy. It could be something else entirely. It's undetermined, but that wiped phone, it's kind of hard to dismiss as noise. Now in Kansas City, there's a facility called the Kansas City National Security Campus. They make non-nuclear parts that go into America's nuclear weapons. Stephen Garcia worked there, a property custodian. He held a top-level clearance. In late August 2025, Stephen leaves his house on foot carrying exactly one thing, a handgun. And then, like the others, he's gone. A tragic set of circumstances. Now, is it coincidence? Maybe. Same kind of people, same kind of clearances, walking off into the wide open and just vanishing from existence. Now, there's a fair counter-argument here. Think of how many people disappear in the American wilderness every year. It's a lot. The New Mexico backcountry, the high desert, these are enormous, empty, unforgiving places. Older folks wander off. People in dark places walk out on purpose. It's tragic. It's not uncommon, and it's certainly not a conspiracy. Now, this is true, right? Not so much. Because there's another, and this one breaks the wilderness explanation clean in half. Her name is Monica Reza, and professionally she went by Jacinta. And Monica was one of the finest material scientists in the country. Almost 40 years at Aerojet Rocketdyne. A technical fellow, the highest technical rank the company has. She co-invented a thing called Mondaloy. It's a superalloy, a metal you can sit inside a rocket engine in pure oxygen, screaming hot, and it won't catch fire. It's the kind of material you build reusable spacecraft and weapons out of. In 2023, she'd been working in NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And on the morning of June 22nd, 2025, Monica went for a hike up Mount Waterman Trail in the Los Angeles National Forest above Los Angeles. And she was last seen around 9 in the morning. And then, same as all the rest, she's gone. Helicopters, radar, dogs, months of searching, not one trace. Now, you're wondering why her case is the one that cracks it open. Naturally. And here's why. The superalloy she invented, Mondaloy, the research that built it, funded by the Air Force Research Laboratory, and you already know who used to run the Air Force Research Laboratory, the General, McCasland. Her life's work ran straight through his old lab. So 2 names on this list with a real documented on-paper thread tying them together. Not a hunch about timing. We've got a funding line you can pull from a file. And the reporters caught it too. The New York Post ran her story under the headline calling the circumstances eerily similar to the generals. Now that is a thing a skeptic can't wave away with a story about lost hikers. So no, I can't sit here and tell you these 4 people met the same end. Nobody can prove that, but I can tell you that they were cut from the same cloth. And one of them was tied by name and by dollars to the very man we started this whole thing with. So those 4 walked off and vanished into thin air. But not everybody on this list disappeared. Some of them turned up dead. And the deaths are where this whole thing gets weird. This is where the real mysteries start getting mixed into the cases that are already solved. Let's start with one that, to me, is the hardest to explain away. Frank Myvault. He was what NASA called a JPL principal. That's the title they hand people making the biggest contributions in their whole field, the heavy hitters. And his work was like something out of science fiction. About a year before he died, Myvault led a breakthrough in detecting water oceans under the ice of moons out of Jupiter and Saturn. We're talking about a search for life on other worlds. That was his shtick. On the 4th of July, 2024, Frank Myvault died in Los Angeles. He was 61. No cause of death was ever made public. No autopsy, none. NASA never said a word. JPL never said a word. The only public trace that this man lived at all is a single obituary somebody posted online. And the people who knew him in that obituary, colleague after colleague, calls his death sudden, shocking, said he'd been making plans for the future. No illness that anybody knew about. A top scientist at the most famous space lab on Earth, he dies, and the cause is just a blank space. Forever. Okay. Hold Myvault right there, because now I gotta show you the other kind of death on the list. And some of these deaths aren't mysteries at all. They've got answers. They've got names. Take Nuno Loureiro, brilliant man, director of the Fusion Center at MIT, one of the top fusion energy minds on the planet. In December 2025, he was shot and killed inside his home outside Boston. His family was right there when it happened. And it sounds like it fits the pattern perfectly until you look closer, because authorities identified the man who did it. A former classmate from way back at their university days in Portugal. And that same man, 2 days earlier, carried out a mass shooting at Brown University. He was found days later. He took his own life. The case is closed. Law enforcement said that flat out. They got their man. He acted alone. It's done. There's no UFO in the story. It's just an old grudge and a tragedy. Then there's Carl Grillmair, Caltech astrophysicist, 30 years studying distant planets in the shape of galaxies. In February 2026, he was shot and killed on his front porch out at his rural place in the desert north of Los Angeles. And again, on the surface, it seems to fit the pattern. But while deputies were rolling up that shooting, a carjacking was going down right nearby. And the man arrested for the carjacking, a 29-year-old local, he got charged with Grillmair's killing. The man pleaded not guilty and he's awaiting trial. So everything I say next is speculation and accusation, not anything proven in court. But here's what the public record shows. Detectives don't believe the 2 men even knew each other. And months before the shooting, Grillmair reportedly called the police on the same guy once already for trespassing on his land and carrying a rifle. That's not a profile of a government assassin. Reads like a troubled local, a string of violence, and a victim who happened to be a scientist. And one more. Jason Thomas, a researcher at Novartis, a drug company. He worked on cancer treatments. Jason Thomas had no government work at all. No clearance, nothing like that. What he had was a brutal year. He just lost both his parents. They passed within an hour of each other. And by every account, his wife's included, he was struggling bad. One night that December, he walked out of his house without his phone, and he didn't come back. 3 months later, when a frozen lake near his home in Massachusetts finally thawed, they found him. No foul play, just about the saddest, most human thing in his entire list. So step back and look at what we just did. We took a closed murder, a local man awaiting his day in court, and a grieving husband who drowned. 3 ordinary American heartbreaks, picked up, dusted off, stacked right next to each other, next to a missing general, to kind of make the number look like a body count. That's the padding. And honestly, on those 3, the skeptics got a point, right? Not so much. Because throw them out and let's move on. Throw out the Loureiro, throw out Grillmair, throw out Thomas, toss every solved and explained case. And when the dust settles, you're standing right back in front of Frank Myvault, a man who died with no cause, no autopsy, and a space agency that to this day won't say his name. And Myvault wasn't the only quiet death at this lab. There was another JPL scientist, Michael Hicks. He worked there for nearly 25 years. He died back in 2023, and his cause of death was never released either. Now, in fairness, Hicks's daughter has come out and pushed back hard. She says her father had real known medical problems, that there's no train of logic that puts him in any conspiracy, that all this speculation has her, in her own words, shaken up. And you respect that. You respect a daughter saying, leave my dad out of this. But it doesn't move the one thing that's sitting at the dead center of this. 3 people, same lab, JPL. Hicks, Myvault, and remember Reza, the superalloy scientist? Her too. Dead or gone. And out of NASA, out of the lab itself, on every single one of them, nothing but silence. The solved ones get solved. These ones, nobody will even say their names. So step away from the bodies for a second and ask the bigger question. Why now? Why is all of it, the general, the scientist, the silence, why is it landing right now in 2026? Well, to get to that, you gotta know what else is going on in Washington this exact minute. Because right now, this country is in the middle of the biggest fight over UFOs in American history. Now, back in 2023, a former intelligence officer named David Grush, he went before Congress under oath and testified that the United States has secretly recovered craft, that it's holding materials. And in his words, non-human biologics. And ever since then, there's been a push, a small group up on Capitol Hill leaning hard on the government, demanding the files, demanding to know what we've really got. Now lay that right on top of the list, because the people crying cover up here, they're not all anonymous accounts with cartoon avatars. Some of them hold seats in the United States Congress. Tom Burchett, Anna Paulina Luna, Eric Burleson, names you can look up, people with subpoena power. And on national TV, a News Nation correspondent named Ross Coulthart. He tied the general's vanishing straight to Monica Reza's. Now, if you want the one case that makes the timing argument all on its own, it's this next one. A man named Matthew Sullivan. Sullivan was a decorated Air Force intelligence officer, Bronze Star. He's read in at the highest levels this country's got, and he agreed to talk, to sit down with Congress and tell them what we knew about secret UFO programs. Want to guess what happened to him? He died at home about 2 weeks before the conversation ever could happen. The medical examiner ruled it an accidental overdose, but Congressman Burleson didn't buy it. He went on TV, called it a suspicious suicide, and fired off a letter to the director of the FBI asking him to look hard at possible foul play. A witness who knew the secrets dead 2 weeks before he talks. You don't gotta believe in flying saucers to find that tough to swallow. It's lots of coincidences stacking on top of coincidences. And here's where it quits being a YouTube theory and starts turning it to something official. The House Oversight Committee, the real one, with the gavel. It fired off demand letters to 4 federal agencies, the FBI, the Department of Energy, the Pentagon, NASA. They wanted explanations for these cases. And the chairman, James Comer, he said something I honestly didn't expect. He admitted that when he first heard all this, he wrote all of it off as crazy conspiracy theory. And now he calls it all a possible national security concern. The FBI confirmed it is, in its own words, spearheading the effort to find connections. And then it climbed to the top of the whole country. A reporter asked the president about it, and the president said, "I hope it's random. We'll know in the next week and a half." The leader of the free world hoping it's random. Now take a breath, because there's a whole other way to read this, and it's a strong one. The skeptic says the timing isn't proof. The timing is the cause. We're living through a UFO frenzy right now, the biggest one in 50 years. And in a moment like that, everybody's got a reason to find a dead scientist and call it a hit. The congressman building a brand on transparency, the TV guy chasing the story, the websites selling the clicks. When UFOs are the hottest thing going, a tragedy stops being a tragedy. It turns into content. Now let's go back to Sullivan. The coroner who actually examined the man said accidental. The congressman on TV said suspicious suicide. The gap between what the expert found and what the politician said, that's the whole thing. The fever takes an ordinary, awful death and dresses it up like an assassination. It's a tight little argument, right? Not so much. Because turn it over just once, if there really was something worth burying, when would you move to protect it? You'd probably move the second it started clawing its way towards daylight. A disclosure push doesn't kill the cover-up theory. It's the exact moment a cover-up would panic. And this part is just real. The federal government doesn't aim 4 agencies at a Substack rumor just for the fun of it. That's happening. That's not in dispute. And no brand, no coroner stamp, no people who love a good pattern, none of it brings back an intelligence officer who died 2 weeks before his own testimony. So why now? The skeptic says because the frenzy makes us see it. The believer says because the frenzy is exactly when they'd act. And as to the ultimate conclusion, I'll level with you. Look at the bigger picture here. I can't tell you which one's right. All right, we heard the believers, we've heard the timing, we've heard the president himself hoping it was random. Now we're gonna do the one thing a conspiracy video never does. We're gonna run the cold numbers. But I'm gonna play fair, so before I do, I'm gonna hand the believers their single best card on this whole table. Her name was Amy Eskridge, and Amy Eskridge was a physicist working on the one thing that sits at the center of this whole UFO talk: anti-gravity, the actual physics of making a craft break the rules that the rest of us are stuck with. She built her own outfit. She called it the Institute for Exotic Science, down in Huntsville, Alabama, actually, which, if you didn't know, is about as deep into America's secret aerospace as you can get. And her whole mission was to drag anti-gravity research up out of the shadows and into the open where regular folks can see it. In 2020, she was set to present some of that foundational work, and NASA stepped in and blocked it, said she needed their sign-off, said it would come in 30 days. It never did. And then in 2022, Amy Eskridge, she was found dead. The death was ruled a suicide. But about a month after she died, she told people in writing that she did not intend to take her own life. So a scientist fighting to expose anti-gravity, blocked by NASA, dead after putting in writing that it wouldn't be done by her own hand. Curious. If you set out to write the perfect silent scientist story, you couldn't do better than this one. So that's the believer's best shot, and it's a strong one. But now watch what the skeptics do to it, because they don't get emotional, they get out a calculator. There are about 2 million scientists in this country, with more than 700,000 people holding top secret clearances in aerospace and nuclear work. Now, if you ran plain old mortality math on just the cleared group, you'd expect somewhere around 250 of them to die by homicide or suicide every 4 years, and thousands more from natural causes. 250 against a list of 10 or 11. The statistics, the math, lands like a hammer. This isn't a spike, it isn't even average. It's only a sliver of what you'd see by pure chance. And the way the list got built, a debunker named Michael Shermer, who runs a Skeptic magazine, calls it anomaly hunting. You start with your answer, the UFO cover-up, then you go digging for anybody who died for any reason on Earth, and you comb their life for a single thread. Space, defense, propulsion, anything. Find enough threads and poof, you've got yourself a pattern. And there's a name for why our brains fall for it. A medical sociologist named Robert Bartholomew calls it apophia. It's simple. Your brain's a pattern machine. It had to be. The cavemen who saw a tiger in the tall grass and ran, even when it was only wind, lived longer than the one who sat there doing the statistics. So we see faces in the clouds, we see a face on Mars, we see the face of Jesus in a corn chip, and we see assassins in a string of unrelated deaths. And Bartholomew adds something else. When an authority figure like a congressman and a president stand up and say the words sinister, our brain pattern doesn't just push back, it latches on. Now take all of that and walk it back to Amy Eskridge, because her own family, they don't buy the conspiracy theory, not for 1 second. Her father, a retired NASA engineer himself, said it about as plainly as a grieving dad can. He said, scientists die too, just like everybody else. And that note about not taking her own life, in that very same stretch, she'd been telling people that she was under attack by directed energy weapons, burn marks on her hands, a device hidden inside an SUV. And I'm not going to make a joke out of that, because that's the picture of a human being in terrible pain. And that other big exotic name that the list loved to wave around, the anti-gravity physicist named Ning Li, she died at 78 of Alzheimer's. So there it is, the cold truth. The string of suspicious scientist deaths are overcounted. They're cherry-picked, a pattern stitched together out of grief, bad luck, by a brain that was built to stitch patterns. It's pretty devastating, right? Not so much, because here's the one thing a base rate can't do. A base rate is about the crowd. It tells you to expect some deaths in a big group. And that's true, that's real. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. But a base rate doesn't tell you to expect NASA scientists to die with no cause, no autopsy, and dead silence from his own agency. It doesn't tell you to expect a witness to die 2 weeks before he testifies. It doesn't tell you to expect a phone wiped clean, back to its factory settings. The math doesn't dissolve or account for everything. The believers took 4 years of ordinary American heartbreak and turned it into a body count. The skeptics took a real mystery or two and waved them off as an average. And somewhere in between those two sit a small handful of cases that neither the conspiracy nor the calculator can quite close. So we walk through the whole thing now. The ones who vanished, the ones who turned up dead, the timing, and the cold, hard math. So let me do exactly what I promised you at the very start. Let me leave it in your hands. I gave you the evidence. You make the call. But first, the honest part, the part I'm not going to dress up for you in either direction. Right at the start of this episode, I told you something, that not one of these cases, not a single one has ever been officially tied to another. And after everything you just watched, that's still true. No proven link, no smoking gun, no document anywhere that says that these people were connected. The believers can't hand you that. And anybody who says they can is trying to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge. But the skeptics don't walk away clean either, because their math is real, and their math is not enough. The believers overcounted, the skeptics overexplained, and right there in the gap, a few cases sit, unsolved, unbothered, staring right back at you. Now, before you decide, I gotta say one more thing, and this one matters to me. While the whole internet's been arguing about saucers and assassins, there have been real people in real living rooms watching all of it. A wife, a daughter, a father who outlived his own girl, and they've begged the world to understand one thing, that most of this list is just grief. Ordinary human grief. People who got sick, got lost, reached the end of their rope, and turning those people into a thumbnail and a body count, it wounds the ones they left behind. They've called the whole thing an absurdity, and on most of this list, they're flat out right. We owe them that much honesty. And then there's the general, the man we started with, McCasland. He's still gone to this day. The FBI doesn't have him, the Congress that wanted to question him doesn't have him, and the president who hoped it was random never seemed to circle back with an answer. A two-star general, ran this country's most secret science. He's tied by funding line to a missing scientist. He walked out the front door into the dark, just never came back. That one I can't explain to you. And believe me, I've tried. I've shown you everything I've got. Every name, every number, both sides all the way up. Whichever one you carry out with you tonight, well, that's your call. You tell me. I'm John Genoa. This is America's Strangest History. Thanks for watching.